All right, so now we're going to talk about, I'm going to walk you through step by step what you're going to be doing for the next tape, the first half of it. We'll do the second half next week. So the first half is the memorized part. Okay. So, you know, like we were talking about earlier, the first thing you're going to do is meet the client who's going to be your partner. You're already going to know them, but pretend like you don't, you know? So, you know, naturally people usually say, "Well, how you doing?" And it's very rare that somebody actually tells you how they're really doing. Every single person you meet is struggling with something. And so it's just become kind of an introduction, but it's very rare somebody expects a real answer. But if you're a therapist and you say, "How you doing?" Oh, okay. I'm gonna get right into it. So we don't do that. You know, I simply introduce myself. And even though I know who my client is and their name might be on a file, um, or their insurance or whatever it might be, I'm not going to assume they want to go by that name. Maybe they're changing their name. There could be a number of things. Maybe they don't like their given name and they like a nickname, you know? So I'm going to say, "Hey, I'm Grafton. What would you like to be called?" It's simple, it's straightforward, but it avoids any of those other problematic things. So that's what you're going to do, and that's how you're going to begin your tape. You say, "Hey, I'm so and so. What would you like to be called?" Um, and you know, you're already going to be sitting in front of a Zoom camera, but if it was, live in person, I'd say, "Have a seat." And the interesting thing is that so many therapists that um, eh, that have offices of their own, they have like the therapist seat, you know? And I'm like, uh, you know, that automatically creates a hierarchy of power in the session. I don't have a seat in a therapy session. I'm like, sit anywhere you want, you know, and I'll sit at any place that's left. Um, so when you think about it, how many very small things happen every day that create a power structure, things that are even unmentioned, you know? Um, so even though they have a dress code at the hospital, but when I have my own counseling sessions outside of an organization, I'll usually wear jeans and, just a normal shirt like this. And I my whole goal is for the client to feel comfortable, or maybe not comfortable, maybe safe, right? So, you know, and I try to avoid as many um, kind of power structures as possible. And that kind of leads us uh, to one of the following things that we'll talk about after confidentiality. But so you can't jump right into the limits of confidentiality unless you talk about confidentiality. Okay, so confidentiality is, and I don't really do the formal definition of confidentiality. I mean, in reality, you know, um, I usually, after we introduce ourselves, they have a seat. I say, "Before we begin, there's some things we have to discuss. Uh, and the first is confidentiality and the limits of confidentiality." So that's usually how I segue into it, something like that. And you know, I usually say something like, whatever you say stays here. And, I'm not going to share it with other individuals. However, so that's confidentiality. However, there are some limits to confidentiality, and I need to share those with you now. So that's the confidentiality part. It's simple, you know. Confidentiality is not it doesn't have to be as specific as the limits of confidentiality. The limits of confidentiality, you do have to use specific language for that. And uh, but that's kind of my intro into confidentiality. And I say, but there are some limits to confidentiality, and I'd like to share those with you now. And like I said, these are written in the notes, and they are pretty much word for word. They're phrased a certain way. Um, Now, the ones I use, I got from Jerry Corey, who writes like the group textbook and the theories textbook and things like that. And he doesn't invent these. He looks at, all kinds of research, what everybody else uses, and he combines that knowledge into the most functional way, language. And so the first one you've probably heard before. And it's if you state that you're a harm to yourself, to others, or an imminent harm, I'm a mandated reporter. So that describes your role as a counselor. All counselors are mandated reporters. And I'm going to need to break confidentiality, but I don't stop there. I always add to ensure everyone's safety. I give them a reason why, you know, and the whole goal is for everybody to be safe. Okay. The second one is new. And, I've been doing this for a long, long time. So when I say new, it might be, 5 or 6 years old. And they added it to the classic limits of confidentiality. And that's because of new laws that came out that protect the elderly, children, and vulnerable populations. So what they did was they added a second limit to confidentiality that follows up on harm to self or others. And so technically, the first one should encompass this, but they thought, children, the elderly, and vulnerable populations and abuse was so important that they wanted to add it as a second limit to confidentiality. And I agree with that. So the second one is uh, you could say I, or you could say counselors are mandated to report suspected abuse or neglect of children, the elderly, or vulnerable adults. And I usually say vulnerable populations. Um, the next thing is it has to do with minors, okay? And um, we don't have to get into a discussion of the age, what constitutes a minor, because in special circumstances, that age might change. Some it's younger, sometimes it's 18, sometimes it's 12 or 14. But so we're not going to mention age. That's for like the ethics class. You can really get into what constitutes a minor, whether it's drug and alcohol or foster care or school or sexuality, whatever it might be. There's different ages. But we're just going to use the word minor for this class. Okay. But none of us are minors. And so I so here's the thing. I always include this, even if I'm talking to an adult. And the reason I include it is, even though I know they're not a minor, even though none of you are minors, if I ever had to say this to a minor, and I didn't have it on a piece of paper, I might forget it if I didn't keep saying it. So I always include it, so that when I run through the limits, I never forget it. I'll never miss it. So I always memorize it. I always say it the same way, and I always include it, even if the person isn't a minor. So because none of you are minors, you can include the phrase, I realize you're not a minor, but if you were, if your parents or guardian wanted to see your records, I'm required to release them. Okay. Now, I added a second sentence to this because everybody says, oh, well, a, a rebellious teenager isn't going to share anything with you if their parents can ask for it, you know. Um, so I usually add that, but I'd ask them to respect our confidential relationship or to become part of this process. Now, I've never actually had to release anything to a parent because they were usually happy with, a broad update, you know, how's my kid doing? you know, but usually if they're interested, I'd eventually want to include them in the process. Well, your kid's not alone in this family. And your kid's not the only problem child. Parents might be a part of that. So maybe you should come in too. Uh, most don't want to. All right. It's okay to help the kids, but parents, hey, they're good. All right. The next one is if a court subpoenas your records, I'm required to release them. I also added a little onto this, just so you'd have more to memorize. But I'd only release what is requested. So, for example, like if I'm in Allegheny County and it's a lawyer from Pittsburgh, they're going to want all the records because they want to see what they can come up with, you know? But if somebody, is going through a DUI and they're seeing me, for drug and alcohol counseling, does the lawyer really need to know about their gender identity and sexuality? I don't think that has anything to do with the case. So I usually offer to say, I'd be happy to write a brief if you tell me what you're interested in, tell me what you'd like released, what's the topic, you know. But, certain lawyers are just going to say, I want everything because they want to see what they can dig up. But, I usually try to at least protect my client's confidentiality to the best of my ability. And learn how to spell the word subpoena. All right. The last one, and I know this is a lot, but all right. As a Penn West student, or even when you're a counselor later, because you'll never be without supervision and treatment teams. But as a Penn West student, I will discuss your case anonymously and receive supervision and instruction on your case, how to better meet your needs. So, that's like when you're in practicum or clinical field and you're meeting with either your site supervisor or your university supervisor and you have to discuss a case. You don't have to use any names, but you're still going to discuss the case so that we can help you better meet the client's needs. And then I say, hey, do you have any questions? And if you were an actual client, ask whatever questions you like. But as a student, do your partner a favor and say, no, I'm good. All right. And remember, confidentiality can be waived when a client gives written authorization to release information. Here's an interesting thing. Does it break confidentiality if the client sees their records? No, it's their records. In fact, they should be allowed to see their records. When clients are sitting there and, They may be wondering what I put in my notes. I don't write notes when I'm with a client, but I write them afterward. The only time I ever write anything down is when I'm doing a detailed assessment for the first session, or if they change a medication and I need to remember the dosage or something like that. So I usually write notes after. But some of them are saying, "What do you write in your notes, Grafton?" And I'm like, "I don't know, read them." And then we'll have a discussion about it.
You put diagnosis down what you think may be there, but you really don't want to give that to the client yet.
Why wouldn't you want to give it to a client?
Because you're not sure yet, and you're evaluating, is it, you know, bipolar, is it, I don't know, I mean,
One way I'm going to decide is I'm going to discuss that with the client. I'm exploring a number of different diagnoses. Let's go over the criteria, and you can tell me which best meets, which comes closest to what you're experiencing. There's nothing I'll ever hide from a client. And if
What was the question?
there's something wrong. Yeah.
What was the question?
Uh, what if you write down a possible diagnosis and you're not quite sure yet? Would you share that with a client? Yeah, I'd discuss it with the client. So that's called a rule out, an RO. Yeah, so maybe you're doing a differentiation and they come pretty close to 2 or 3 diagnoses that are really close, but you haven't decided yet. You're going to rule out 2 of them. Yeah.
What about like a client who's paranoid or like in psychosis? Is that okay to still disclose, like, I think you're like in a paranoia, or like in a sense where that's more getting closer to the crisis state?
So if a client is in crisis and not based in reality, then everything's handled a little differently. Yeah. So what I do is I affirm how they're feeling. I don't, it's like saying, I believe what you're experiencing, is, what you're feeling. That's not saying that I believe they're seeing aliens, One interesting thing, just since you brought it up, so I had this client that was already diagnosed by a psychiatrist as experiencing schizophrenia. She was on all kinds of meds, and she believed that men dressed in black, driving the big black SUVs, were following her. She believed that her phone was tapped, that people were looking her up on the internet and doing deep investigations, that strangers were sitting outside her house. And, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia, paranoia, on all kinds of meds. After about 4 weeks of seeing her, I got a call from DC from a lawyer, and they said, "I know you're not allowed talking about your clients, but I'm allowed talking about your clients. And one of your clients' husbands recently passed away. They worked for the government, and their death is in question. They are being followed. Their phone is being tapped, and she doesn't have schizophrenia." Yeah. So, yeah, got her off the meds. So you never know. You never know. All right. So let's see where we were. Um, yeah. So one of the things that I talk about after we go through confidentiality, limits of confidentiality, I want to talk about the counseling process briefly for this tape. If we were in a real session, we'd have an hour and I'd go into great detail. But you can do a couple things. I usually talk about, Freud would call it the analytical framework, but it's really just kind of letting them know about the counseling process. We're going to try to meet here for For you, it'll be a half hour every week, and, it might be 50 minutes, and I'll take 10 minutes to write down notes after. And it's like the logistics of counseling. And I'll always let you know when we have 5 to 10 minutes left. I usually recommend that they don't bring up any big issues at the end of counseling. So I got into a routine that asked them, do they have any important or larger issues to discuss at the beginning of counseling? Because people are anxious about bringing things up. They might want to see how I'm going to react to it. And they wait until the very end of the session. They bring it up. I'm like, okay, I'm not judgmental. And, I've heard so much, that not much shocks me. And so they realize I'm okay with talking about it, and then they want to talk about it, but we're out of time. So I usually want them to, if they have something important, bring it up at the beginning so that we have time to talk about it and process it. But if you bring something up at the end, we won't have enough time because I have to respect my next client's time.
Really quickly, how do you kind of do that organically? Like if they're hesitant to start. Sorry, say it again.
Try it out.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, me?
Yeah. There's the anxious laughter. It's anxiety. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah. So I usually just say, a lot of people wait till the end of the session to bring up an important topic that they're uncomfortable with, but then we won't have time to talk about it. Try bringing it up at the beginning, so we'll have time to process it. That's what I say.
All right.
Yeah. All right. So normally when people ask about how I say things to client, it's pretty straightforward. There's no magic, So the next thing is, I kind of reassure them that they may experience uncomfortable emotions. That's what we're here to process. It's perfectly normal for us to experience the full range of emotions. And I just want you to feel safe doing that. Now, the next one, it's up to you. Maybe you haven't had theories yet, and that's okay. So, if you don't want to do this next part, that's fine. But if you've had theories, give it a shot, So express your personal philosophy and theory, So personally, my personal philosophy is that, we're all human beings. Everybody's equal. You and I are equal. I just happen to have some special training as a therapist. You might have training in something else. You might be an electrician or a computer systems analyst, but we're both human beings. I just happen to have some training in this, and I see us as equals. And, and so that's kind of the first part of my philosophy. The second part is that as human beings, everybody's struggling with something. That's part of being a human being. And, I'm here to help you, through that process. And hopefully we'll be able to move through that together. So that's kind of my philosophy. And then if I want to talk about my theory, I'm an existentialist. And I believe that, each of us wants to find meaning in our lives. And sometimes we placed meaning in things that don't really fulfill us, or we've been sidetracked by struggles in our lives. But eventually we all come back to that search for meaning. And hopefully, through this process, you'll be able to have a meaningful existence or a more meaningful existence that, will help to bring you some joy and fulfillment. So that's kind of my philosophy and my theory, and yours can be whatever you want. you know? And if you haven't had theories yet, skip it. That's the least of my worries, this part. All right. Now, I usually do ask if they've been to counseling before, but I don't want to know why, you know? It's more like asking them what their experience in counseling was like. So I usually say, have you ever been to counseling before, and what was your experience like? And my answer is always the same, no matter what they say. So, no, I've never been to counseling before. My answer is, oh, well, thanks for coming here and giving counseling a chance. I know it takes a lot of courage to come to counseling for the first time, so I commend you in that, and I hope this is a positive experience. Yes, I was in counseling before, and it was a horrible experience. I thought I'd give it one more try. Oh, I'm sorry you had that negative experience. I really do hope that this will be more positive for you. Thanks for giving it another chance. Yes, I was in counseling and it was a wonderful experience. Fantastic. I really hope that this experience is just as positive for you. It's all the same answer. It's just based on their different experiences. Okay. And that brings us to the next question, which is, so what brings you here today? And that's when they express their issue or problem or symptom or situation, whatever it might be. And we are going to go through all of the techniques that you're going to use next week. But this is the memorized part. Next week, you don't know what they're going to say. So the only thing you can learn is 5 basic techniques and learn how to respond to whatever they might bring up. All right, questions about anything we went over?
If we did take theory and we skipped that part, do we get knocked?
I'm not going to ask you whether you took theories or not. So I just won't know. Yeah. No bonus points because there are no points. It's all or nothing. You either know it or you don't. Bonus points. Yeah.
So, counselors able to do that?
What do you mean?
Like to diagnose, because I thought in one of my previous courses, it was like psychiatry and psychologists that can diagnose stuff with the DSM-5.
Oh no, we can diagnose with a license. Yeah. Yeah. But we're not going to do that in this class. Well, go ahead and ask your question, Matt. Ask it out loud.
A couple of the students in the class sounded like they were talking about or possibly inquiring about the differences between psychotherapy notes and progress notes. I know some counselors keep personal notes for themselves to kind of like track what's happening in sessions and making connections. But those aren't necessarily kept in a place that can be subpoenaed. And they're usually destroyed
I got it.
after.
I got it. Okay. That is vastly not recommended.
Okay. Taking the notes
No, they can be subpoenaed.
if they don't
That's the
exist.
mistake. That's the mistake.
Okay.
People think, oh, if I keep these as my official notes and then I keep a little diary. No, no.
Okay. I wanted to draw that distinction because
Huge
I
mistake.
got mixed answers on that.
No, there's no mixed answers.
Okay.
Do
Appreciate it.
not keep private notes.
Got it.
Also, if you keep them in a different place and you lose them, it's just like breaking confidentiality.
Okay.
So, no, the answer is do not do it. In fact, the only time, I mean, I really don't have to take separate notes to process a client. I do that with my treatment team or with my in my private supervision, or, I think about it, but there's never been a time where I actually have to keep my private notes. Yeah. What else?
In that portion where you are going over your theory and your kind of philosophy, is there a way of divulging too much in that portion? Like, not like showing your hand, but like, I don't, I feel like there's a possibility of giving too much of it away, if that makes sense. Is that like,
It makes perfect sense. And I don't believe that what we have learned can't be shared. It's not like some secret that we've, paid for and, oh, I know REBT. No. In fact, I teach my clients the theories that I'm using. And that helps them use it themselves. Yeah, there's no divulging what I'm doing, I teach them the theories. So what we're moving towards here with questions about notes and do I tell them what I'm doing in my theory? No, you need to be totally open and authentic with your client. Everything you do or write, you should be able to discuss with them openly. And they should agree with it.
Because if a client wants, a client can, especially when insurances are involved, can request to have a diagnosis changed.
So what they can do is not submit it to the insurance.
Yeah. But then the client's on the hook for the full amount.
Yeah. I mean, so here's the thing. A lot of therapists out there may slightly change a diagnosis so that insurance covers it, But no matter what the diagnosis, no matter how severe or minor it might be in severity, I'm always going to be honest about it. I mean, that's what it is. So, but on the other hand, I got a sliding scale.
In my diagnosis class and pathology, it kind of said, try to keep the diagnosis to the least harmful.
Well, I mean,
Levels of depression, try and keep it to the least, I don't call, you know what I'm trying to say? That's what I was kind of spotted.
yeah, so think about it this way, keep it to the most accurate.
Yeah, but it was more like keep it to,
I know,
yeah.
but I'm saying make it the most accurate. Yeah. Yeah.
There's one quote I heard for therapy that I thought was interesting. It's kindness without honesty is manipulation. So if you're not being honest, you're not giving them the whole truth.
Yeah, I'm always going to be honest with a client. I'm always going to be transparent and open. But let me ask you, since, I brought up other things like diagnoses and things like that, questions about what we're doing for this part of the tape. There's entire DSM classes and ethics classes and, but questions about what we're doing for this tape.
So for the trauma and counseling class, we had this really crazy scenario that was, that was created for us, not crazy, but, kind of dramatic. And are we relying on our partner to come up with what they're struggling with, or is there some kind of guideline, or just are we being ourselves?
Well, I mean, if you're not comfortable sharing something and, you can make up something to talk about.
Okay.
But I mean, you're all graduate students.
Sure, yeah.
You've all got anxiety about this
Yeah.
program and time management and,
So it can be real.
being
Okay.
able, so that alone is something everybody can talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, we're not going to talk about trauma. We're not going to talk, this is not a trauma class. I teach that on Thursdays. But, you can talk about something that you feel not comfortable, but, it's not going to turn into therapy, yeah.
As the person say you're doing the therapist's position and someone you're interviewing, what they get too deep into it? How do you like, say they start going into traumatic events?
Yeah, so the question is, what if the therapist gets too deep? So don't say anything. You're in control.
Yeah, I was just
I
thinking.
mean, you're a human being, you're in control. This is only a student tape. Say, I don't want to talk about that. Yeah. So, I mean, think about this. You're in control of anything you share or don't share. We're not doing treatment or therapy here. We're just practicing basic skills. All right. We're not getting into trauma or things that are going to create a lot of anxiety. You're in control and you can stop anytime you want to say, oh, I'm done. We're going to move to a different subject. Stop the tape, start over again. It's no big deal. Yeah. And if you really don't want to talk about how you're experiencing some anxiety in grad school, make something up, but be able to go deeper if you make up a scenario. Yeah. Somebody else have a hand up?
So, that include us here, so like if we break off, we're still gonna have our laptops on Zoom, face to face?
So when you practice, you're going to practice right here. But on the nights we tape, you're going to be on Zoom. You don't have to sit here. No, not when we're recording. But I'm going to go over the entire recording process next week. Any questions about what we went over tonight?
So for tonight, we're talking about just the confidentiality portion of what we're going over. Next week, we're going to talk about the skills. The week after, we're going to be filming.
Yep.
As far as the definitions and stuff, did you want us to get in a little bit more, make sure I'm understanding this correctly, a little bit more in detail on the definition of confidentiality, or what you covered in your example would be sufficient enough?
Yeah. So basically, they are in your notes, and it is under the section confidentiality and limits to confidentiality. And that's what you memorize.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Yep, it's all right there. It's typed out. All right. So I know everybody's anxious about this, but what's the worst that could happen? You do it again. No bad grades, nothing. You just do it again. That's it. So, hopefully that'll relieve some anxiety. Nothing bad will happen. No bad grades, no failure. You just do it again. That's it. All right. So what I would like you to do for next week so that you can practice, I wanted to practice a little tonight, but we ran out of time. But so memorize this first section for next week so you're not reading it next week. Memorize what we talked about tonight. And so I showed you where the notes were. And then let's see, if you go to your syllabus, it's tape 1 checklist. That's the outline. All right.
25 to 30 minutes.
Well, not for the memorized part. That'll just be like 5 to 10. Yeah. But once I teach you the skills, that'll add on another 15 next week. Yep.
Got it.
Yeah, so this will be about 5 to 10 minutes memorized. That's it. All right, we'll practice next week and we'll go over the skills. We'll see you then.
Thank you very much.
You betcha.
Have a good night.